Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Hi, my name's Marcus Vaughan. Welcome to the Big Resilience Reset. It's actually number 6 of the installment of Big Resilience Reset. So very excited to be back. Today, we're focusing on cybersecurity, SOS, back to basics. For those who have dialed in before, you know, I'm the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Illumina, a resilience technology platform. And we're here to really push the boundaries on resilience, and very excited to have a big conversation, not purely just around the resilience function, but also tapping into the world of cyber today. I'm absolutely delighted to have an amazing panel ahead of me today to talk with and to open up this conversation on cyber. So we have brought in some professionals from not just within the resilience industry, but who are tapping into more of a cyber lens. I'll start with Carla Radford. So Carla is an experienced business leader and board advisor and passionate about values-led leadership and people development. And Carla founded an international recruitment business, Beecher Madden, back in 2010, before it was acquired in 2017. In 2020, she joined Orpheus Cyber as the COO, and Orpheus is a threat intelligence company with a SaaS platform that helps organizations manage their own risk and that of third parties as well, to really understand what their cyber risk score is. So Carla's been included in SC Magazine's Top 50 Women in Security in 2019, and she's a finalist as the Women of the Future Awards in 2016, an Entrepreneur of the Year, and a finalist in the Future Ladies Awards for Mentor of the Year in 2019. Carla, welcome to the Big Resilience Reset.
Hey, thank you. And I'm sorry I gave you such a long bio.
I love it. There's a lot there. So I'm always excited. So thank you very much for joining us today. Really looking forward to getting into the conversation. Also joining us is Kathy Milron. So Kathy is the CEO of eSilo, which is a data protection and cybersecurity company. She's a speaker, a trainer, a certified small business mentor, helping business and municipal agencies prepare for cyber attacks and other IT mishaps, the ultimate goal of the disruption they cause the organization. Before eSilo, Kathy spent 15 years at General Electric, where she worked extensively on corporate IT and banking divisions before moving to the GE headquarters as one of their chief technology officers. And outside of work, Kathy is active in the South Florida business community and volunteers as a mentor for SCORE. She also serves on the board of directors for South Florida Tech Hub and Technology Advisory Committee for the 10th largest public school district in the US. Kathy, welcome to the Big Resilience Reset.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for today's conversation.
Very much so, and very excited to have your perspectives on today's discussion. So thank you very much for joining us. Last but not least, James Green. If you've been to a Big Resilience Reset and you don't know who James Green is, you must have had the sound off and the screen closed down. So James Green is the co-founder of Illuminate Advisory and an advocate of intelligent risk-taking, driven by the belief that risk can be a powerful tool to help organizations reach their maximum potential. In 2020, James was named the BCI Continuity and Resilience Consultant of the Americas, the first to be awarded for this twice. Well done, James. Currently is the co-founder of Illuminate Advisory and is also an advisor and ambassador for Illumina as well. So James, welcome back to the panel. Look forward to another big conversation.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm glad to be here. You've got 2 cyber experts and then you've got me. So I'll do what I can to tread water today.
Don't worry, I'll be trying to keep up the whole way through as well. So looking forward to it. All right, well, without further ado, let's get into it. So today's conversation, we are really focusing on cybersecurity, SOS, which, hey, we throw an acronym at it straight away. I love it. That's what we do in this industry. I think when we're talking about SOS, we're actually talking about shiny object syndrome. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I wanted to start off, our friends at the BCI, Business Continuity Institute, released their Technology and Resilience Report for 2023. Really interesting read, some interesting findings coming out of that. Please do take some time to download that. You can get it off the QR code on the screen. But it was interesting. We saw a stat come through where 49% of organizations don't have a resilience technology strategy in place. And I thought I'd start there and get, I guess, thoughts from the panel in terms of a resilience technology strategy. And I guess getting your thought on how, given the complexity of today's environment in which we're working, how important do you believe it is to have a resilience technology strategy in the first place? And what would this look like also from a cyber perspective? Carla, I might start with you.
Well, I guess my first thought was, what does that actually mean? But after working that out, like, I think it's so important, right? Like, of course it's important. All of our businesses rely on technology. That's not news. And I think it's really important that it's joined up. And I know we're going to cover this like overall, but one of your biggest risks is a cyber risk. So if you haven't got a resilient strategy that includes cyber, or you're working in silos, then I think you're going to have a real problem.
Kathy, I'm interested in your thoughts.
Tells me that those 49% of companies are just winging it on a hope and a prayer. I think that technology is so core to everything we do. As a backup company at our heart, right? That's what eSilo is. That's where we got started. I can't imagine having an organization that has not sat down and thought about the day that their systems or their data get corrupted or compromised in an attack, or a disgruntled insider goes and deletes a whole trove of information that they shouldn't have. So I think that backups, a disaster recovery, a business resiliency strategy are absolutely essential in today's modern environment.
James?
Yeah, I think of those 49% of organizations, 75% were lying, 20% didn't know what they meant by that term, and the other 5% were honest. And actually, I'm surprised the number is really that high, because I don't think the other 51% of organizations can agree on any resilience strategy, whether it's cyber or anything else. And I don't think 51% of organizations even know what resilience really looks like or really means in their organization.
Tell us what you really think, James. Tell us what you really think. But we were having this conversation around shiny object syndrome, SOS, obviously, as we were into an acronym. I mean, is the lack of having a resilience technology strategy, or a cyber technology strategy, does that actually open us up to shiny object syndrome in organizations looking at just the latest thing, as opposed to what does this look like holistically? Carla, I'm interested in your take in terms of what you experienced when you're working with organizations on this front.
Can do, right? Like, because cyber in particular is such a big area, and there's last count, one of the companies I advise, like over 9,000 cyber providers globally, right? Like, that's a huge number of companies. Not all of those things are going to be necessary. Some of them are shiny objects. Some of them aren't going to be the right size for the majority of organizations. They're for big companies, right? But there's some basic stuff, things like what Kathy does. If you don't have like a backup strategy, like, I'm really scared for you on the day that does happen, and that does come, because it will, and it might be a cyber attack, it might be something else, but like, that to me just seems like the most basic and the opposite of a shiny object. Like, when I have my business, probably 10, 11 years ago, we had backup. So like, if you don't have that now and you're not thinking about that now, I really don't understand how you've kind of got to that place. But it absolutely can open you up to shiny objects. And I think you need to be really clear on what is necessary, what's a core part of your strategy, what's the basics, and then what comes on top of that as you mature.
Yeah. Well, I think just to play on that point a little bit, and then I might flip this over to you, Kathy. I mean, what are the fundamentals in 2023? So if we're thinking about developing out a strategy for cyber, for resilience, for technology and cyber resilience, like, let's level set here. Like, what are the core requirements right now, as opposed to, what is the shiny thing that might catch your eye that mightn't be as useful? I'm interested in your take on this, or where we are.
I mean, going back to the basics, it's backups, it's MFA, it's user access control. So how you provision and revoke and manage access through somebody's life cycle. It's device posture and device security. It's vulnerability scanning. It's a whole number of things that we've been doing for years and years and years, right? Anybody who's been in technology for a long time, we've been doing these disciplines forever. I think the problem with shiny object syndrome is that there's some cool new AI tool, AI powered this or that, or some advanced threat hunting, all of this stuff sounds great. And I think, unfortunately, cyber tends to be a fairly complex area. And folks that aren't necessarily experts in the space or understand it, it's easy to fall prey to the marketing, right, by the tool companies of, oh, this is, the shiny object. This is the one thing that you need. And if you buy this and you implement this really expensive tool, then you'll be safe. And the reality is it's a whole host of tools fit together in a very intentional way that are necessary to truly protect an enterprise today. But we also work with a lot of small to mid-sized organizations, nonprofits, and those basics that I mentioned, you can put processes in place to implement those things with very little to no tools. I mean, yes, you need, some basic tools, but so I think there's this misnomer in the market that you have to spend a lot of money or have the greatest, and latest, fanciest thing, when a lot of the things we're talking about are basic blocking and tackling. It's the stuff that we've been doing for 10 years, 20 years, and we just need to do it well, do it better.
Okay, and does that, I guess, just picking out that a little bit, does that actually mean we need to be thinking more about what is the outcome we want to achieve as opposed to what is the technology we want to plug in? And how do you shape that conversation with executive?
Yes, and I would actually flip it a little and say, what is the risk that we're worried about? Like, do we understand all of our technology-based risks? Which ones do we think are most likely based on our business model and some of the unique characteristics of how and where and who we operate with? And then what would be the impact to the organization, and using that to prioritize. It's those in the business continuity, the resiliency space are very familiar with this kind of a model, but I don't think enough organizations are having those conversations and starting with the risk first to then determine, where do I allocate my limited budget and where do I focus my limited resources where they can have the biggest impact.
Yeah. James, I mean, you're obviously, you spend probably more of your time in risk and resilience as opposed to down the rabbit hole on cyber risk. Looking at it from a resilience perspective, though, I mean, shiny object syndrome, how does this play into your advisory work with organizations? Like, what are you seeing, and how do you level set?
Yeah, first of all, I personify shiny object syndrome. I love shiny objects. I've spent the week building out a resilience pirate strategy. And I ran a LinkedIn poll on Monday. I was curious, so to be able to answer this question. So I ran a poll on Monday, LinkedIn, rather benign poll asking about ChatGPT. Just, hey, what do you think about ChatGPT and risk management? 9,000 people saw that poll. That is like shiny object personified right now. Everyone's talking about it. I saw my first today, a company that builds crisis management plans solely based on ChatGPT, which is mind-boggling to me. So that's the first one. But going back to your original question, I think where I'm still seeing that fundamental that needs to be there this year is robust crisis communication strategies. We're seeing companies fail left and right this year with that intersection between cyber resilience and crisis management around the crisis comms part of it. Companies are just completely forgetting that in this day and age, your PR, your brand, your social media is a huge part and an integral part of any type of resilience.
Yeah. And so this is an interesting point, because it feels like when we have a lot of conversations in the resilience space, cyber is still very much off to the side and owned by cybersecurity somewhere over there. It's not my problem. Zeros and ones and backup. I just want to bring that back for a second, because that feels a little bit off to me when we have these conversations. I mean, Kathy, I'll go back to you as a starting point. I mean, what's your view on cyber, where it fits in holistic resilience, and like where it's currently owned and where you think it should be owned?
This is an interesting one. In most organizations, I've seen cyber roll up underneath technology, the CIO or the CTO of the organization. And oftentimes we find, resiliency is in a different functional area altogether.
Mm.
Where should cyber sit? I think I've been in a lot of conversations, especially in larger enterprises, where cyber is attempting to pull out from underneath IT and elevate itself as a top level function. And in a lot of those cases, it's, information security is one category of security, but you've got product security, corporate security, there's other aspects of it in the organization. So that's kind of one argument. The other one is, cyber resiliency feeds into overall organizational resiliency. And shouldn't there be a closer tie between the resiliency team and the cyber team? And I think in some cases, we've actually seen quite a bit of competition between those organizations where, I think cyber gets a lot of attention and a lot of budgets and a lot of, management mind share. And so, thinking about how to bring that a little bit closer together, those teams a little bit closer together, it hasn't happened in the past. And I'm not sure if that's because the level of engagement on resiliency overall just hasn't necessarily been elevated the same way cyber conversations have been elevated in the past. I'd be curious to know what everyone else thinks.
Yeah, I mean, Carla, what's your take on this?
I think it's really obvious that cyber should sit under resiliency. Like the cyber industry talks all the time. Should the CISO report to the CFO, the CTO? Where should it sit? Really should sit in resilience, because what are you trying to do? You're trying to stop your business from failing because somebody attacks you through your technology. That's ultimately it. Like that's resilience at its core. Unfortunately, I think that ship has probably sailed and we're 10 years too late having that conversation. You now got a cyber industry and cyber functions that are too big to go sit under resiliency. But it makes so much sense to me that that's where it should be.
James, maybe the ship has sailed. Maybe it hasn't.
Yes.
Feels like maybe it has. Like you were here while the ship was like going out from the dock. You're not new to this.
Yes, I was.
What
Yes, I'm the
happened?
old man here.
What?
Yeah, I'll tell you why cyber doesn't report to the head of resilience. We completely missed the boat, as long as we're sticking with nautical analogies here. I've heard for the last 10 years, cybersecurity isn't my responsibility. Cyber resilience isn't my responsibility. InfoSec isn't my responsibility. And, it saddens me, because resilience professionals at their core are charged with helping ensure the organization remains in business. Doesn't matter why. That's our fundamental goal. So we need to stop saying that's not my job. And that's what I heard 5 to 10 years ago. Oh, that's InfoSec, that's IT, that's the CIO. That's not my job. And now, like Carla said, that ship has sailed. There's a whole industry built around cyber resilience. And I think the next coming is supply chain resilience. I'm hearing the same thing from resilience professionals. Oh, supply chain is not my responsibility. Well, it should be, just like cyber should have been.
I'd go so far as I've almost heard that actually start the trend even in third-party risk. So it seems to we have splinter industries taking off, and resiliency is missing a lot of opportunities to own that. And I want to touch on that for a minute, because there's a lot, like the cyber industry in particular is a big industry. It's probably one of the biggest industries and probably one of the fastest growing industries still. Why is there so much budget in cybersecurity and not like the budgets that we see for cybersecurity off that of resiliency? Like I see it every day, every single day of the week. Kathy, I mean, you're in there talking to your executives on this. I'm interested in what's happening there. Why is cybersecurity such a big budget versus resilience budgets?
Because they've got folks like me in their ear telling them to capitalize on every breach and every incident and every close call. I mean, I used to work at a large Fortune 10 company, and we would see state-sponsored attacks on a daily basis. And one of those was a particularly close call, and it caught everyone's attention. Yeah. And at that point in time, we had a CISO and we had a program, but it wasn't in the spotlight, I guess I'll say. And it took that close call for our board of directors to appoint a very, very senior, one of the most well-respected IT leaders in the company, to run IT risk and cybersecurity. we hired, probably 1,000 people over the course of a couple of years. We asked for a massive budget, but all because we recognized that we were really behind. And without steady investments over those years, we were not going to be in a position to thwart the next attack before it happened or as it was happening. And so I think taking advantage, knowing how to take advantage of those crises and those moments to ask for the budget that maybe, the team didn't feel comfortable asking for or asked for, but then got shot down before, you have to know how to capitalize on those to get what you need. And that's what cyber has done effectively. And the headlines in the news certainly help.
So we're talking about impact, near misses, actual hits, and leveraging that to get the money. Show me the money. Are they the key ingredients?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carla, I'm going to throw to you. I mean, what's your experience in this in terms of securing budget for cyber or other? I mean, we're all in the same. We are actually all in the same industry, even though they're splintered industries. But I mean, what's your take?
I mean, I think Kathy's right. I think cyber has done enough branding that it's been able to generate, budget and revenue to come to those teams. But the other thing I think is, because I remember when resilience, business continuity, crisis management teams were growing and expanding, and that's probably, I feel, reversed a little bit. And I think part of that is because those functions went through a setup phase, right? Where we had no plans and we didn't have anything, and we set up those plans, and now we need to maintain them and adapt them as businesses change. But actually, you probably don't need to keep expanding those teams in the way that you did 10, 15 years ago. So I think part of it is just, that life cycle of the function. And then part of it is, we've branded ourselves really, really well.
James, how important do you think it is to have, I guess, the soft skill of being able to influence as well in our space? I mean, you obviously spend a lot of time influencing executives. I mean, as a soft skill, I just want to touch on that for a minute, because there's plenty of major crises happening day in, day out, like from active shooters to hurricanes to wildfires. Like, there's no lack of disaster for resilience practitioners who are focused a little bit more on the, asset tangible response factor. I mean, what's missing here? And I'm interested in your take on influence.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a secret right now to the entire audience of how to influence and get influence with management. One word: props. Props are very important. So tomorrow is Cinco de Mayo. So I have with me a giant piñata taco. This is the key to management influence. But seriously, though, we need to make our programs exciting. What Kathy talked about, what Carla talked about, when you talk about a cyber incident or a hacker, management gets excited. It's interesting. And then our profession, we talk about, we use Times New Roman 8-point font on our BIAs. Who cares? We need to make our programs exciting. We should have marketing materials for our program. That's one of the things we first do when we come into a client. Hey, does your sales team have, branded material, branded Word docs, branded PowerPoints? Let's do the same thing for Resilient. Let's make it interesting. Do you have a tagline? Do you have an elevator pitch for your program? And that's the fluffy stuff, the shiny stuff, what I love. But then once you do is you turn that into information that's relevant, right? Are you providing relevant information to management? Or are you just saying, hey, we've completed 75% of our audits through May 1st? Who cares? That's not relevant to management. That's not actionable. And I want to add, I actually have people texting me who are on the, I guess they don't want to, we'll keep them anonymous. But this resilience professional said, I got third-party risk and I got cyber and I got supply chain in addition to crisis and BC and DR, because I never said it isn't my job. I always said, yeah, that is my job. I'll take that. So you want to be opportunistic too and look for ways. What's management talking about? What's relevant, interesting to them? And how do you grab it and fold it into your empire?
Interesting. I mean, Kathy, to differentiate between, the missed opportunity and influence, I mean, what's your observation on this? You've probably seen this a few times over now.
I was actually going to say, to add to what James was saying, I think there's an element of really being able to talk business and to explain the work that you're doing in terms that senior management understands. And so too often we think and look and act very heads down. And I've seen this with a lot of BC professionals that I've worked with. It's very kind of procedural and tactical. And sometimes they have a hard time articulating, we've updated, 45 BIAs. Okay, so then sit down in front of senior management and tell them what that means. Tell them how they should be thinking about the business differently, how they should be thinking about budget allocation and investment differently now that we have a much better understanding of the relative importance and impact of these different processes. And same thing when it comes to DR. Sometimes in organizations you see BC and DR in different departments and different buckets run by different leaders. And so everybody goes through their planning, and I said, okay, did you ever marry the two halves together to say, all right, now that you have the BIA and you understand what your DR capabilities are, you've got gaps. How are you recommending to management that they address those gaps? And so it's that very last mile, that last piece that sometimes doesn't happen. And that's the part that gets senior leadership attention. That's the part that gets you funding. It gets you all the things that you're looking for. And I'm not sure we're always elevating that conversation.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it is amazing the amount of impact data we sit on as a profession. And we were obviously talking about this at a high level and earlier, and I wanted to run a quick poll to work out who in the audience here has actually used BIA data to articulate a business case for investment, because there is a lot of really good data there. And we're really interested to see who's actually, I've just launched a poll, so you'll see that come up on your screen. So be honest, it's anonymous. Have you actually gone through the whole BIA process across the organization and gone that last mile to use that for investment purposes? And if you're one of the people that are saying yes, I can see the results coming through. There's an interesting mix there. If you're one of the people that have said yes, maybe just drop in the chat channel some high level comments in terms of what that looked like, how you're able to do that, and maybe what the outcome was. So I think that's always fascinating for anyone else to jump on as well. So I'm going to end the poll. Last chance, last takers. There we go.
Marcus, while people are voting, Lester said in the chat that we should use resilience as a business differentiator to stand out from our competitors. And Alice echoed with that. It is truly a strategic advantage and mandate for today's markets. Yeah,
100%, 100%. So we've come in at bang on 50-50, which is really interesting. So a lot of people have leveraged this data, which is fantastic. And there's a lot of opportunity for others to grab this information and leverage that. Again, Carla, I mean, what's your take in terms of using impact data and your experience on that to influence the organization, whether it's for budget or other?
Well, coming from threat intelligence, it's data and it's also stories in a way. If you can say, hey, this, we would use this in cyber, this attack happened on this competitor, it cost them this much money, it had them shut their business or downtime for however many hours, that data, but also that story of how it happened, that's quite compelling to go make your executives worry about what can happen to them. And you can do that in resilience as well, this tornado hit these companies and they couldn't function for 2 days. Here's our plan and how we would avoid that. So I think it's the data, and it's married sometimes with that story to make it interesting.
I started down a rabbit hole conversation on LinkedIn just over the last 24 hours around this in terms of getting budget on security versus response. And I think, people thinking that, response, well, it's response and it's not as exciting or sexy as the security and stopping the threat attack happening in any instance. The point, I guess, where I got to in that conversation was there's a lot happening out there from a cyber perspective. It kind of feels like on a long enough timeline, you're going to have an incident one way or the other. Maybe it comes down to how bad the impact is on that incident. So with that in mind, again, just thinking about, the lock on the door versus the ability to respond, why is this such a how does this still drive budget? Like when you know you're going to get hacked, like over a long enough timeline, you're probably going to get hacked. So your response is going to have to be there. Yet that security element in terms of trying to stop that is still so high. Like, why is that security piece just so, why is it so lucrative, I guess? But why does it scare so many people to get that budget? Because it feels like the impact piece there triggers more in people's minds than like at an executive level than anything else. I mean, I guess we're doing a little bit of a circle here, Kathy, but is there anything else you want to add to that in terms of your observation around the human factor there?
Well, there's something to be said about things that people don't fully understand. Right. And a lot of executives don't really understand it. So when I'm scared and I don't understand, then I'm more likely to say yes and fund and buy things that people who are supposed experts tell me. I use a really simple example when I talk to executives about protecting their digital security or their cybersecurity. And I compare it to protecting your home, because you said, Marcus, you said locks on doors. And so I tell them, the front door is like the firewall, keeps the dirty internet out and keeps random people from kind of walking through your home. Then you have locks. So those are the accounts and the keys, right? You lose your key, someone else comes walking in through your front door. That's your passwords. And then we go through the whole thing. Windows, like actual physical windows, are like, your software patches. So those things are open. You got to get them applied and closed. Alarm systems, right? That's like your anti-malware. You've got insurance for your belongings. That's your data backups and also your cyber liability insurance. And then you've got the police when someone breaks in, that's incident response. So this whole, like, you lay that all out for someone, you say, you don't just shut the door at night. Like, you have these layers of controls to how you protect your family and your home. You need those same layers of redundant controls for how you protect your business and your digital footprint. And then all of a sudden you realize it's not just one tool, it's a set of tools orchestrated together addressing different things. And I think some of that does drive up budgets.
Got it. Carla, I mean, anything else that you would add to that in terms of getting the mind turned in the right direction for budget?
I mean, I love that analogy. I try and use sort of physical analogies because they're really easy to understand, aren't they? And I think part of it, like, to go back to that point, why do we spend on protection and not response? Like, I think there's a shift going on. I think we are seeing people invest more in kind of preemptive response plans and IR firms and retainers and things like that. But it just feels better, right? I'm doing everything I can to stop that happening. It's like, in part, it's an emotional reaction, but also you can't not do it. You can't just have response. You have to put some protection in.
Yeah, absolutely. James, I mean, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Carla said, that it's an emotional reaction. And look at the story that Kathy told about the house. The cyber resilience industry is better taking that data that we collect in the BIA and other things and telling stories around it. And they're also better quantifying the potential loss. You can go to Google right now and type in, what is the average cost of a data breach? And you'll find reams and reams of articles. And now I want you to go in and type in, what is the average cost of being hit by a tornado or any classic BC event? You're going to find nothing. There's a great story there where you can tell management, if we have a breach, we're going to lose $100 trillion. And if we prevent, so the cost of preventing that is opportunity cost. And when we prevent and mitigate a more classical BC risk, we do a terrible job of telling the story. We just say, oh, we updated our plans this year. There's a severe lack of storytelling and obviously props in our profession.
Yeah, I have to admit, Kathy, I literally pictured a house with locks, alarm systems, and
Yes.
response team turning up when you told that little story. So I think marrying up good data, near misses, things that people can relate to in the media, and then actually bringing it back to my world, I think that's a fascinating and very effective approach. I'm ready to spend money, so like we'll have to catch up after this and work out what our cybersecurity posture looks like. I want to talk a little, just deviate a little bit on, obviously it's a big scary world out there from a cyber perspective. The digital ecosystem is really complex. There's state-sponsored threat actors now. how, like, is it possible to even be resilient at this point in time from a cybersecurity perspective in terms of keeping people out and, you know, and even responding effectively? Like it is not a week goes by that we don't see major like attacks happening to the point where they won't talk about it in the media, but you know that someone's handing a bag of Bitcoin over the table at some point in time. I just want to get a download whilst we have you guys online around what's actually happening out there, and then what does this mean for us at the moment? Kathy, I might start with you again.
You asked if it's possible to be secure with state-sponsored hackers. Yes, if you have backups. So I thought that I follow the Register. I don't know if you guys read that publication, but there was an article last month, and in it, Rob Joyce, who's the NSA's cybersecurity director, was quoted as saying, you know, backups, like you got to get back to the basics, and backups are the absolute key to resiliency. And he was talking a little bit about Ukraine and just how they have been able to survive years of this onslaught of data wiper malware and all kinds of crazy threats. And it's because they have gotten really, really good and practiced at using their backups, recovering, cleaning up and moving on, and just wash, rinse, and repeat. And so, you know, can you prevent really, really intelligent and targeted, you know, state-sponsored attacks? No, in a lot of cases, although the fancy shiny tools will help. But what you do have to do is make sure that you are absolutely equipped for the day when it happens. You know what to do. Your team understands the plan, has good response. Your management team and crisis management and communications, as James was saying, is all well versed on how to handle it from a PR standpoint. And yeah, that the business leaders understand the impact of downtime by the hour, by the day, so that they're effectively allocating enough resources to make sure that this is being adequately addressed.
Yeah. Carla, I'm interested in your take on that. There's points to expand on or dive into, and what's your view on the world here?
I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for another hour about this. So I've got 4 points I'm going to try and cover off. So like Kathy's point on backups, like 100%, right? Like any cyber person will tell you what's worse than finding out you've been hit by ransomware. It's finding out your backups don't work. So, or that you don't have them or you haven't tested them. So like number one thing. I talk to a lot of insurers and a lot of incident response firms. They will tell you off the record that most attacks, probably they will say like 99% will be prevented if you have MFA. Like most of the attacks can be stopped by really basic security processes. And the fact is you and your competitors, well, your competitors don't have them, so they're getting hit. When it comes to state-sponsored attacks, they're not going after everyone. They're going after your Fortune 10 companies, and maybe they're going after people in your supply chain, but they aren't going after everybody. You need to protect against cyber criminals and attacks like ransomware or phishing attacks that are really easy. So you can put some basic things in to be secure in there. And then my last thing is it goes down to your supply chain. So if you've put your data into your supply chain, that's where your risk is. If the nation states aren't coming after you, but because you're secure, they're going to your supply chain next. So that's the next frontier. And like James said, maybe that's where resilience can get more involved again. So hopefully I crammed in an hour's worth of thoughts into that.
I feel like there's a lot there we can unpack, but I mean, James, I'm interested in your take on this as well in terms of, yeah, get the basics right, but from a resiliency perspective, I mean, what's your advice there in terms of building in more resilience for that to happen?
Yeah, well, my first piece of advice is it's time for another prop. So I have my favorite, my Mr. Robot hat here. And the reason I'm wearing this, I have a client who's Fortune 100, and they said, hey, what do we have to do? Who do we call to be bulletproof against a state-sponsored hacker? And I said, you need to call Mr. Robot. And they said, that's a TV show. And I said, yeah, because it's completely unrealistic to think you can be bulletproof against a state-sponsored threat actor. But the way you can be resilient is to realize that when you're talking about state-sponsored threat actors, and to Carla's point, if you are a target, it's not a matter of when it'll happen, it's going to be it's going to happen. So to me, the resilience mindset, the cyber resilience mindset is knowing that it's going to occur. How quickly can we identify it? And then like Carla said, do we have some common sense things? Do we have two-factor authentication? Do we have, a lot of these hacks are just so easy to prevent. But I think organizations, you still have that big mindset, oh, we're never going to have a breach. We're never going to have a hack. An employee's never going to leave a laptop at an airport or, airmail something into everyone on the airplane accidentally. A lot of it is just human error. And to be resilient to me is not thinking we're going to prevent something, but things are going to happen. How quickly can we identify them? How quickly can we respond? And are we able to, survive and hopefully thrive during any type of incident?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're still addressing a disconnect though between functions within an organization, between, I guess, protection and response from a technical perspective and an operational perspective. Kathy, I mean, what's your observation and advice in terms of starting to bridge that gap between the technical, I don't know what's happening over there, cyber world, and the operational response world from a resiliency perspective? If there are two, and it still feels like there are two very clear silos going on there in terms of the conversations I have, and I'll note that a few people in the webinar chat have said, "Hey, I own everything," and that like hats off to you, well done.
Good for them.
Yeah, correct. For everyone else, I mean, how do you start bridging that gap?
It sounds really trite and basic, but I think it's peer level relationships between the people who own or are doing those functions. And a lot of times in organizations, and we actually did an assessment of a large public company and kind of all their different silos. And they had a BC team, a crisis management team, a DR team, a separate enterprise risk function, a separate internal audit group, a separate compliance group. I mean, every possible thing that was siloed was siloed. And part of the conversation was whether or not reporting structure wise, we drew new lines on an org chart. There's no reason that you can't start a resiliency committee or group, right? A risk focused group with the senior leadership team, have everybody come and brief them on their different areas and what are the threats that we're seeing? What are the risks? How are we doing with our plans? How does all of this stitch together? And just by forcing and forming more conversations and by developing interpersonal relationships, there's this natural sharing of communication, collaboration that I have always found in large enterprises that just kind of happens organically. I don't think it's something that you have to wait for your leadership team to solve, or that, a box in an org chart's going to solve, because it's not. I think it comes down to the way that people operate day to day. And if you start inviting more of your peers into some of the reviews and the conversations that you're having, and maybe even the brainstorming sessions, right? It doesn't have to be a report out about something, but you do it collaboratively. I think they're more inclined to invite you into those conversations, and it all starts to come together.
Carl, is there anything you want to add from bridging the gap between technical and operational response that you think is, again, from your observations of working with organizations to close that gap and build that bridge a little bit more?
I can see a couple of ways you can do it. So now I can't think of any examples where this has happened, but it's certainly possible, right? A cyber attack locks you out of your building. Well, resilience probably owns what happens if you can't access your building, not cyber. So why not go have that conversation and start bridging that gap by talking about those scenarios? And one of the things I always felt resilience teams did really well was driving awareness and champions throughout the business for resilience and getting them to own some of that resilience play. What about going to cyber and saying, hey, I know you're struggling with awareness. We've done these things. Let me help you. So I think there's a couple of things that resilience own and have done really well where they could actually help cyber teams with problems they're struggling with.
James.
And I love the idea. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Carla, I love the idea of a joint exercise, right? Like using a scenario and doing a joint tabletop. I think that's fantastic. Everybody should be thinking about how to do that.
If you talk to the insurance teams, they're worried about cyber losses, but what they're really worried about is cyber attacks that lead to physical losses. And that's where these teams, there is a connect and there needs to be a connect.
Absolutely. I've run a lot of joint cyber BC exercises over the last 12 months. And the first thing I ask everyone is, have you all ever been on the same Zoom, or have you all ever met each other before? And every single time the answer has been no. So like Kathy said, it doesn't matter what the org chart is. You are responsible for building personal relationships with your peer group. Reach out to those people, regardless of reporting structure.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important point around insurance as well, because insurance is again a growing industry in this space, and it's been a hardening market for a number of years because I think a lot of underwriters went and wrote a heap of risk, and then it started to come back to bite from a claims perspective. How do you leverage the insurance conversation in your conversations around budget and getting things done? Not just budget, like budget's one thing, right? But actually getting things done across the organization. I mean, Carla, do you have any observations in terms of incorporating insurance?
Insurance and cyber is going to be really interesting these next couple of years, because the price of the premiums is getting to a point where you might want to self-insure, or you're not good, like outsourcing that risk is no longer worthwhile. It's going to be so interesting. The insurance companies that I talk to, they're following the threats. So if you don't know what the threats are, like you're behind them. And then they're looking at organizations really deeply, and they're driving a lot of cyber resilience and a lot of the things that need to go in place. So like understanding what they want to see, and a lot of it is basic, is really going to help you there. But it's going to be a very interesting 12 to 24 months there, I think.
Kathy?
I would say Carla's exactly right. They're elevating kind of that low bar. So we tell our clients, if you want cyber insurance, by the way, we think you really need it, but if you want to go and get coverage, you have to implement MFA. You have to implement strong remote access. You have to do a lot of things that, cyber suffers from this as well. They've been making recommendations, and some get picked up by management and some don't. It's not that they have, blank checks. And so now we're starting to see companies that were a little bit resistant to investing in some of these controls have to put it in place for cyber, either because they'll never get a policy, or they'll pay through the nose on a policy and they could actually pay a lot less. So I do think it's positive in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like there's definitely been a turn in terms of the understanding of cyber insurance. And I think especially now that we're starting to see coverage like within the policy whittle away at the same time as the premium go up. So you're actually paying for less coverage than probably what used to be. But I remember before we got into technology and doing consulting, we were running a tabletop exercise for a major department store, and their online store was their biggest issue. And the risk manager, when we're talking about objectives, one of the key objectives before we ran that scenario was, I want to outline in front of the executive team what this business disruption looks like if our online store goes out for a week during pre-Christmas sales season, so we can buy coverage. But it feels like that, again, so it's an impact conversation, but it feels like that has turned a little bit. And I think the level of awareness around cyber insurance, I think everyone's actually run to that trough, and now that it's just become a very expensive product to buy. James, what's any observations or advice in terms of incorporating the insurance conversation into either risk or resilience or cyber?
Yeah, I want to point out, Steve Hindle has a great comment in the chat that says, remember, cyber insurance is still unstructured and largely in its infancy, really only 2015. I have a lot of conversations with resilience executives and C-suite around insurance. And for me, it's a fabulous way for us to grab budget. So I have one client right now, they have a joint cyber and business interruption insurance policy, which is a nightmare. Their premiums were scheduled to go up 100%, so double. And we work with the insurance company. Okay, is there any way we can bring that down? And they said, yeah, if you have some of these basic BC crisis management cyber risk things in place, we'll reduce your premium by 20%. So we went to management and said, hey, give us 10% of that as budget. You're still saving 10%. The resilience manager's happy because they now have funding outside of a roll of duct tape for their program. Management's happy because they've, reduced their potential premiums by 10%. And then hopefully the organization has actually mitigated some risk. So if you're a resilience professional and not involved in these insurance conversations, cyber, business interruption, facility destruction, I think you're missing another boat and a great way to add value to the organization and to add hopefully resources to your team.
And I think the same could probably go for any insurance. I mean, cyber is just one line of insurance. Business interruption insurance has been around since insurance was essentially, incorporated. So I guess I just want to see who's coming through in the chat channel. Who, from a resiliency perspective here, has had connectivity to the insurance element of the organization? Have you been involved in the providing information through to either the risk or the insurance team at the time of actually selling that risk to the underwriters? Interested to get people's hands up in the chat, or just a quick yes, no, what's insurance? What are you talking about? Any comments coming through in the chat channel? I just want to get a quick run through of who's involved. I can see a lot of pirate talk, so thank you, James.
Marcus, while they're doing that, I did want to add something to what James said, because I thought it was really interesting. There's this whole idea of how do you get busy people to take time out of their day to really embrace and support the resilience, objective, right? If they're not a core part of the resilience team. And I think very often we find kind of BCDR professionals that are very like stick oriented, right? So carrot versus stick. They're, oh, well, we have to do this because it's required in our policy, or it's required in this regulation, or we're going to have an audit, or it's my job. So we have to do this. Whereas if you can find more carrot or incentive based motivations, like, hey, here's an opportunity to save on insurance. Here's an opportunity to reduce the risk of the organization. Here's an opportunity for us to be faster and more competitive. I know a couple folks in the chat mentioned competitive advantage. And in this era of concern over third parties and supply chains, if you can demonstrate to your customers that this is how seriously we take operational continuity, and this is what we run as a program, that's going to attract them to do business with you versus someone else. So if you can find a balance, it's it's never one or the other. It's a healthy balance between the two. I think that makes you a much more well-rounded resiliency professional. And I think that distinguishes you from your peers, and I think starts to clear the path for you to be able to get done the things that you want to get done.
Yeah, 100%. So Alice has said yes, she's been connected in for years. That does not surprise me. She's an absolute powerhouse in our industry. So I'm not surprised at all, Alice, that you've been running that. Guys, we're coming to the top of the hour, so I do want to close down, be respectful of your time. But in terms of the key takeaway that you would give everyone to take back for the rest of 2023, I mean, when it comes to cyber risk, shiny object syndrome, getting budget, connecting, building, whatever you want to say, this is your opportunity. Carla, what would be the one piece of advice you would give to people in terms of becoming more resilient in cyber?
MFA. I think that's probably
back to basics.
One thing, we'll go with that.
Yeah. Okay. Kathy?
Backups.
Backups.
Take them, test them, make sure they're error-free.
James?
Two pieces of advice. Tim Tams, always. But seriously, you need to be able to tell, based on our conversations today, you have to be able to tell good stories to management. Just sending charts and graphs these days is not going to move the needle for your program. Yeah.
I think from me, I would be thinking about incorporating cyber and resilience response teams into your simulation structure for the year, really getting those teams together and making sure that people really understand the risk, not just from a technical perspective, but from an operational response and business disruption perspective. So I'm gonna pause there and say thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate your attendance today. It has been absolutely delightful having you on today. So Carla, Kathy, James, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.